Hotel. Dangerous Person 2.0. English channel. Welcome to Dangerous Persons 2.0. Today we are going to speak about a case whereby a Caucasian murderer killed a Chinese prostitute and then fled Hong Kong jurisdiction. The man tasked with securing justice for this Chinese lady is my guest, sitting right next to me, Chief Inspector �W𝐚𝐜𝐤𝐤𝐥𝐿. Good morning, Norman.
Good morning.
Very good to have you again.
Thanks.
This murder occurred on 28th March 1977. It's quite difficult to get any information about it, much less accurate information. So when this case was handed to you in 1972, were you with the Hong Kong police at that time?
In the
1977.
77, yes, I was already in homicide bureau at that time. I'd been a policeman in Hong Kong for 4 years.
Okay, now the victim in this case, her name was Kwok Ying Lam. She was also known as Jenny. Yeah. She at one time had her own bar. That's what the Chinese press said. She was supposed to be from Shanghai. She lost her bar, then became a heroin addict and went into prostitution. Is that true, or?
Well, I can confirm that she was originally from Shanghai.
Okay.
She was a prostitute.
Okay.
But whether or not she owned her own bar at some point in the distant past, then I can't be sure.
Okay.
Anyway, it's not that relevant to the homicide.
Okay. So the murderer was aged 24 years old. He was an assistant cook, I believe, on the Peninsula and Oriental Steam Navigation Company shipliner.
Yes, Arcadia.
The Arcadia.
Arcadia.
Now, the Chinese press reported that around 2 a.m. on March 28th, 1977, Jenny basically came with a white man into the Mirador mansion. It's a hostile. And they got a room, $25 hourly rent, maximum for 2 hours, and they rented it for an hour, and they would pay after they were done. That caught my attention. That's a bit unique. Normally you pay when you're renting a hotel. Was that normal that you could pay after you used the...
I can't really say because I've never used these facilities myself.
Okay.
But it would seem quite logical because maybe after 1 hour they would want some more time, but they don't want to come out and pay money and then go back into the room. So it seems quite logical.
Okay.
That they pay when they're finished.
I see.
Whatever they're doing.
Okay, so this actually becomes a problem because 30 minutes after checking in, the staff hears a fight. They don't do anything about it because I guess arguments occur all the time. It's something they're used to. But then after that 1 hour expires, the staff calls the room, says, do you want that second hour? And a white man comes out. He has a mustache, they say, wearing a white shirt, pair of jeans, and he wants to leave. But the staff is saying, you got to pay. According to the Chinese press, the man punched the staff and ran away. The staff then enters the room and they find Jenny is dead. Is that a correct summary, so to speak?
Yeah, this is fairly accurate as far as we can tell from the scene and from the witnesses at the scene. Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about the coroner's report. I already know the Chinese press report is inaccurate, so that's why I want to jump straight to you. The coroner ruled that it was death by drowning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, and this was from the tongue.
Yes. She had been hit so violently with a metal ashtray. The ashtray that was found at the scene was bent almost double, and it was quite clear that she'd been hit in the jaw. Her tongue had been partially severed, causing her to bleed a hell of a lot, which she then drowned in her own blood. But it doesn't take the way that she was murdered.
Sure.
It was a murder,
yes.
And the injuries showed that it was a murder. She's had a lot of injuries around her face.
So there was also a lamp. That
yes,
apparently...
there was quite a heavy lamp in the room which was broken, and that was used to hit her also.
Okay, so she had serious, extensive injuries.
Yeah.
Just in the head area or the whole body?
The more serious injuries were in the head area. She was a very slight build. I think she was 58, almost 60. very slight-built lady. She had a wig which was found in the room.
Yes.
She had false teeth which were found on the floor.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, I've also been told that the reason for this fight, now I don't know if this is true, is because the white man didn't realize it was a false wig and dentures. And I guess when they were interacting, somehow this came out. At some point, you're obviously going to arrest this white man, which is Mr. Clements. What started the fight? Did you ever get to the bottom of that?
No, because he made no statement.
He made no statement.
No statement. Nothing. No explanation of why he was there or what he kept silent throughout our interrogation. He took the five, as Americans would say.
Okay.
So we don't know.
Okay.
It may have been better for him if he'd actually explained what happened. But we have some conjecture that that's a possibility.
Okay.
That he picked this prostitute up, and then when she asked for money, but she'd already taken off she had a false bra as well, which was found in the room.
Oh, so she had a false bra making
not a false bra, but
push-up
yes,
type deal.
Push-up type, but false teeth and a wig. She was almost bald.
Okay.
So it could be that when he realized this, he refused to pay, and then there was a fight there. So but we have no evidence of that.
Okay, but that could be a logical...
It seems most likely scenario.
Okay, because that actually, I believe I heard that before from a lawyer, that was the wig, and basically he wasn't getting what he was paying for, and was surprised when...
Yeah, but again, these kind of fine details that we can't prove really doesn't affect the murder charge.
Okay.
Or the evidence for him against him for murder.
Okay, so let's get into how you found out who the murder suspect was. Now, it was also reported in the Chinese press that there was a matchbox with the name of a bar in the room where Jenny was killed. Is that correct?
Yes.
There was. So, do you recall the name of that bar?
No, I don't.
Okay. But you obviously went to that bar.
Yes, but it was of no... it turned out to be of no relevance to the investigation.
Okay. Now, the police produced a sketch, I guess, from the witnesses.
Yes.
And put it out there in the public.
Yes.
This is when you come into the case, basically. So from your recollection, just as a young detective, what do you recall?
Well, the thing I recall most was going to work. Our office was on the 8th floor in the May House, which was the police headquarters at that time. It still exists. But and on the 20th floor, which is the top floor, they had a restaurant in the officers' mess. And it had a magnificent view across the harbour. And the Arcadia, when I was having breakfast, the Arcadia was moored there. And she's quite an imposing ship, a huge liner with thousands of passengers. And so I went down to the office and carried on with my work. Then a few days later, the news of the murder broke. And I was on the 20th floor again having breakfast, and the Arcadia was gone. So this was the morning after the murder, or the same morning. So the Arcadia was no longer there, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't get the case immediately. Homicide Bureau doesn't always pick up cases immediately. Sometimes the regional or local police deal with it until a certain point when they think they can't handle it anymore. So their headquarters will try and push it on to Homicide Bureau. So Sammy Che, my chief inspector at the time, was a wise old bird. He said, because the Caucasians involved, if this case is not solved within a few days, it's likely to be pushed on to us. And he was right. But I think it was about 10 days later before we got the case, which is not really ideal for us, because we like to get the scene of crime and the post-mortem.
Yes.
We would like to be part of that.
Yes.
But anyway, it had all been handled pretty good by the local police, and we got handed over a case in good shape, so to say.
Okay. How do you establish it was a Caucasian?
Well, there were so many witnesses.
Okay, so by the time it was handed over to you, you already knew that.
Oh, we knew that, and the photo fit or the sketch had already been published.
Okay, so how do you now connect this Caucasian to the Arcadia?
Oh, okay. Well, let's start from the beginning of our investigation and also taking over from the Kowloon police investigation. The MTR was being built at that time. So there were a lot of European, Caucasian specialists, contractors in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was buzzing with engineers. It's a massive project which is still ongoing today. So Kowloon police focused on that aspect because it's very unusual for a Caucasian to be a suspect in the murder case. So they focused on the biggest group of Caucasians in Hong Kong at that time, apart from the usual finance people and bankers and all the others. But these were construction workers and tunnelers. And, so they focused on that, which is not unreasonable. But they'd made no progress. So we got close to the senior people in the MTR. But I wasn't convinced it was MTR because these people are in Hong Kong. They're not just coming in and out for a day. So I wasn't convinced it was an MTR person. And I wasn't convinced that these people would be involved with a 60-year-old prostitute that walks the street around Austin Road, Nathan Road, because they've got money.
Yes.
And they can go to these other bars,
Sure.
these bars. So I asked an inspector, a friend of mine in Homicide Bureau, I asked him a favor to come out with me and we'd do our own survey. So we went out and whenever we saw a potential client approaching one of these, it was a group of prostitutes, Jenny's group, we would approach them with no intention of arresting them or any such thing. We just wanted to know who they were and where they came from. So we carried that over 2 or 3 nights, and without exception, they were all merchant seamen.
Okay. The clientele were always
merchant seamen.
Okay.
No locals.
Okay.
No locals. No. There was quite a few U.S. servicemen in town at that time. Don't forget the
7th Fleet.
7th Fleet, that sort of thing. But these were all merchant seamen.
Okay.
And all they're middle-aged people.
So now how are you connect this category of merchant seamen and sailors to the Arcadia?
Well, there was a hotline set up from the very start of the case, inviting members of the public to phone in anonymously. And we inherited a whole pile of what we call POL 150, which is police information forms. So someone would call the hotline, the policeman taking the call would write down the information. And then that would be reviewed to see if there's any follow-up action. So I was going through this pile, and there was a pile that had been rejected. So I went through them, and I came across one which was a taxi driver had phoned in. And he said he was a taxi driver, and about that time of the murder, and outside the Mirador apartments in Nathan Road, he had picked up a Caucasian. And the Caucasian had asked him to go to a ship called the Tongshan. It was a Chinese ship.
Okay.
So he took this Caucasian eventually to the Tongshan, where he got off.
So why is he going to a Chinese ship instead of his own ship?
That's why they discarded it.
Oh, okay, okay.
They didn't follow it up at all.
Okay.
It was an anonymous call anyway, so it was very difficult to follow up. But they could have at least found if there was such a ship, and where was it. So I thought this rather strange. But before coming to the police, I was the 3rd officer in the Merchant Navy.
Okay.
And we were traveling all around Asia, and it's common practice, say in a port like Nagoya, we don't know how to get around. So when we leave the ship and get a taxi, we'd try and find a landmark around which was prominent. So when we got in the taxi on the way back, we could point to that landmark.
Okay, so...
And then once we got to that landmark, then we say, oh, they take us there. They could see our real destination.
Okay, so the landmark is like the North Star.
Yes.
But this is something only merchant sailors would do.
Yeah, we couldn't speak the language, and we wanted to get back to our ship. But quite often the ships are hidden away in port areas that we can't explain how to go there. There's no Google to go back to. So we use that.
So on your personal experience as a merchant sailor yourself,
I thought this is not so strange.
Okay.
Why would the taxi driver phone in anonymously and say he picked up a Gweilo, a European, to take him to the Tongshan, which is a Chinese ship which was actually in dry dock in 𝐂𝐞𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐿. So first thing I did was phoned up the Marine Department, and on that date was a ship called the Tongshan in the dry dock, and they said yes. It's no longer there, but it was there on that date.
Okay.
And I was posted at one time in 𝐂𝐞𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐿 police station.
Okay.
And I know that 𝐂𝐞𝐫𝐢𝐥𝐿 Road, the 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐫𝐢𝐥 Dockyard was huge. It's now 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐫𝐢𝐥 Estates. The Dockyard doesn't exist. And it was surrounded by a very high wall. So from the street or the road, you couldn't see inside the dockyard.
Okay.
It was completely enclosed, except for the waterfront in the dockyard. And there was a gate on the west side and a gate on the east side. So restricted access with tight security on either end. Thousands of workers. So I knew if he was going to the Tongshan could be seen because the dry dock part of 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐫𝐢𝐥 was actually directly down a small street where you could actually see the name of the ship in the dry dock. Quite strange, but so I could imagine myself saying I wanted to go I wanted to go to that ship, not that ship, but when I got there, I said, over there, please.
Yeah.
Now, when I checked what ship was in the dry dock and actually tied up alongside in 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐿 was the Arcadia.
Okay. Was that the only other ship there?
Yes.
Okay.
On that date.
On that day.
So it was a Saturday morning. So I said to Sammy Che, my chief inspector, I'm going down to 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐫𝐢𝐥 to have a sniff around. So I went down to 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐫𝐢𝐥 on my own, and I knew Paddy Kelleher was the chief of the 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐫𝐢𝐥, the Taikoo Dockyard Police.
Okay.
At that time, they had a separate police force, security basically, but they were pretty well organized, and they'd been there for 100 years. So I went down, and Paddy was not there, so I phoned them from the security office and told them that I was just wanted to find out if there's anything strange happened on that day. And he exploded. He says, "Yeah, some stupid Gweilo said he'd been robbed inside the dockyard." So I thought, well, can I speak to the people who dealt with the case? He said, he's not on duty now, but I'll tell the inspector to come down and meet you now.
Okay.
Take him from his home and come down. So the young inspector came down to the security office, and he told me, he said, yeah, it was early hours in the morning, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Two Gweilos approached the security officer. One said he was a ship surgeon, Dr. Zanuski was his name. And the other one was a young man called Clements, who had scratches on his face, and said he'd been beaten up and robbed. The inspector took me to the place where this young man said he'd been beaten up and robbed by 2 or 3 Chinese males.
Yes.
And it was right under the glaring spotlights. Right. So the inspector said, there's never in the history of Taikoo Dockyard been a robbery.
Because you're enclosed.
Totally enclosed.
Okay.
Never a robbery in the sense of violently stealing from someone with a knife or something like that.
Okay.
Never in the history of Taikoo Dockyard. And secondly, if there had been a robbery, who was going to commit a robbery underneath the spotlight? Okay. So I thought that was very strange. Then I interviewed a cleaner who happened to be there at the time, and I didn't show the drawing of but I asked her to describe, and it was exactly the same as the sketch. The sketch. So the report we had Clement's name.
Yeah, so now I have
We
the
had a
name.
description. He had scratches on his face. He said he'd been robbed by 2 or 3 Chinese males. The Dockyard police thought he was lying.
Yes.
He was brought there by Dr. 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐵 to make the report. So,
And this doctor is from the Arcadia.
ship sergeant from the Arcadia.
Okay, so Clemens actually went back onto the ship.
We found out later.
Okay, so because this doctor, why is he bringing Clemens to make this report? Did Clemens want to make this report? Did the doctor insist he make this report?
We found out later. We actually interviewed the doctor. The ship had sailed by then. The Arcadia, after she was in Dockyard, went back to the 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐵 berth.
Yes.
Reloaded all the passengers. She was doing
Okay.
some repairs in the Taikwood Dockyard.
Okay.
So they unloaded the passengers while she did a few repairs for a day or so. Then she went back and loaded the passengers, and then the ship sailed. So by the time we started to focus on the Arcadia, she's already sailing. She's gone.
Okay, so you're actually focusing on the Arcadia after it's left
Oh,
port.
yes, she's gone, yes.
And basically what you just told us is how you made the connection.
Yeah, so on that Saturday morning, I found that the person, John Clements, who answered that description, had been picked up at the relevant time, at the relevant place near the mansion, near the murder scene. Got taken to a ship called the Tung-Shan. And from the obviously he wasn't going to the Tung-Shan.
Yeah.
So from the Tung-Shan you could see the Arcadia.
Okay, so now you've also gathered some witnesses.
Yes.
You have a taxi driver.
No, we haven't got the taxi driver
don't
yet.
have yet.
Not yet.
Okay, who do you have?
So I went back to headquarters and spoke to Sammy Chair, the chief inspector, and I said, look, I think we've got a good lead here. And called the superintendent, Superintendent Wong, who was head of Homicide Bureau at the time. So next Monday, I went down with another inspector, went down to the P&O offices in Hong Kong and spoke to the head of P&O, and explained to him that we wanted to speak to one of the seamen called John Clements, and we also wanted to speak to Dr. 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐵. Now, the Arcadia at that time was around the Australian coast, and its next port of call was New Zealand, Auckland. So we didn't want to alert the suspect, but we had at the scene of crime, we had a very, very important piece of evidence, if it matched the suspect, was a fingerprint in blood on the mirror, which obviously was the fingerprint of the murderer. So it would be very easy for us to solve the case if we could get the fingerprints of the murderer. And that's it, case solved. So we had to tread very carefully. So P&O were extremely helpful to us. So they telegraphed the Arcadia, the captain, directly to the captain, explained the position. And then the first inquiry that we had was with Dr. 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐵. And we learned very soon after that Dr. 𝐂𝐂𝐤𝐥𝐵 had been in a cabin about 4 or 5 in the morning with another seaman. We would call him the number one donkey man, who's the engineer in charge of all the auxiliary plants on the ship, like all the winch engines and all these sort of things. They call him a donkey man. But he was there in the cabin. Dr. 𝐂𝐂𝐤𝐥𝐵 was there, and they were drinking, having a late night session when Clements came into the cabin. And it was obvious that he had quite a deep scratch on his face, a bit disheveled, and his watch, he said he'd been robbed, to explain away the scratches. And Dr. 𝐂𝐂𝐤𝐥𝐵 said, well, you need to report to the dock police. He didn't want to. Right. Later, a long time later, I spoke to the doctor, and he didn't believe him at the time. So he insisted on taking him. He took him to the Dockyard police. Otherwise, no report would have been made. The report was his downfall.
I see, because the doctor did not believe him.
No.
And insisted.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, he was a big, John Clements, the same age as me at the time, he was 24, but he was a big guy.
Yeah.
It'd be very hard or very stupid for 3 Chinese males who could not have been outsiders.
Because they're confined in the dock, they had to be dock workers.
Dockyard. To take on someone like him underneath the arc lamps, the brightest place in the dockyard, right next to the security office. So Dr. Zinowski took him down and insisted he make a report. And he related, he in the telegram, managed to give us this story. So that made us even more suspicious. So we decided to meet the Arcadia before she docked in Oakland. So myself, Superintendent Wong, Sammy Che, Chief Inspector, and another Inspector Aitken Davis, 4 of us flew down. And we first went to police headquarters in Auckland.
Okay, Auckland, New Zealand.
Auckland, New Zealand. And it was the evening. So we explained to the Criminal Investigation Bureau there what the situation was. And we discussed how to handle it. We had no jurisdiction in New Zealand. The New Zealand police had no reason to interview him. A robbery had been reported, that's all. Okay.
So just on the issue of jurisdiction, the port state jurisdiction belongs to New Zealand right now, but like you just said, New Zealand had no reason.
No.
You can't even accuse them of anything because you haven't matched the thumbprint yet.
No.
Okay, so they really can't help you.
We haven't had any identification process.
Okay.
He looks like the suspect, that's all, but none of the witnesses, we haven't had identification parades yet.
Okay.
So we had no thumbprint.
Okay, to compare with.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're in New Zealand. The New Zealand police can't help you.
They want to. Of course, they'll help us all the way, everywhere they can, as much as possible. So we thought, well, the best thing to do is board the Arcadia as soon as you arrive. The captain was expecting us.
Okay.
So the Arcadia came in about 6 in the morning, and we boarded straight away and went straight to the captain's cabin. And with Chief Superintendent from the New Zealand Police.
Okay.
And we discussed how to handle this. Even to the point the captain offered us, look, the next port is Fiji. If you need more time to seek evidence, you can come with us to Fiji. So we've only got a few days' clothing. He said, never mind. We'll open the shops for you. You can have whatever you want. So extremely helpful. So there was some vague idea of being incognito on a ship and possibly trying to get maybe a fingerprint of Clements, and then what? How to send it back to Hong Kong for comparison, etc. And in my view at the time was, look, having been ex-Merchant Navy, the Merchant Seaman won't, as we say in UK, will suss us out in a matter of hours as being policemen. We're not. To be incognito.
So you're not going to blend in.
We had no clear plan.
Okay.
So anyway, it was decided that we were going to face Clements. And the way to do it was to call him up to the captain's cabin and tell him that robberies are extremely unusual in Hong Kong. And he had reported the robbery, thank you very much, and he'd been very helpful. But we'd like him to go back to assist us more. We would pay for all his airfares and all accommodation, everything, and we'd make sure that he would be join the ship in the next port in Fiji. So he was called up to the captain's cabin, and the captain was very careful because he also called in the union representative. And so we explained to the union representative what we were planning to do. So the captain didn't want any union problems on the ship. So the union representative was fine. If he volunteers to go back with you, that's fine. It's no problem.
Okay, let me just get this clear. You're talking about taking him back to Hong Kong to investigate the robbery done unto him.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were lying.
Okay. All
To
right.
be quite frank.
Okay.
We just wanted somehow to get him back to Hong Kong.
Okay.
So we were kind of, let's see how this works. But there's no really any other alternative. But we need to try and get him back. So anyway, he was brought up to the cabin. And he came in, and we were sitting in chairs just like this. And I put it to him that these are very serious issues of robbery in Hong Kong, particularly in a dockyard like this. So we really wanted him to assist us. If we got a suspect, we need him to go on an identification parade and try and pick them out, etc. So we'd like him to come back to us for a few days, and then he could rejoin his ship at our expense. And the captain said, "Are you willing to go?" And he said yes. But he really didn't. Well, he said yes.
That's
I thought,
crazy. He knows there wasn't a robbery
yes,
because he filed a false police report.
but he didn't know we knew it was false.
Okay.
So the captain said, "Well, you better go and pack some things and go with these people." So I said, "I'll come with you." I've never been in a big ship before, which is a lie. I'd like to come down and see what it's like. So I went down with him and to his cabin.
Just you alone?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I wanted to get hair samples. I wanted to get his DNA. We didn't have DNA at that time, but we could get blood samples from hair.
Okay.
And I noticed a pair of suede shoes in the cabin. And it was, to me, it was a blood stain on the suede shoes, without a doubt, in my mind. So he was putting another pair of shoes on. I said, "No, the climate's not suitable for them. We take these shoes." And he did. He put these shoes on. Right?
The one with the blood on it?
Yes. And so he probably didn't know it was. And while he was in his main cabin, there was a little toilet. I was taking the hairs from his brush and sticking them in an exhibit bag, just in case he ran away. At least I'd have something.
Yeah.
And I took a brush also, which would have his fingerprints on, and put it into an exhibit bag. So if he ran away, absconded, and we had no jurisdiction to chase him and catch him, at least we would have his fingerprints and his blood type. So that was the situation. So that night we had to stay in a hotel in Auckland because there were no flights until the next day. So the New Zealand police came with us discreetly. They weren't with us, if you know what I mean. They were following us. And I asked the New Zealand superintendent, "Can you please speak to the hotel and make sure that there's insufficient rooms?"
Okay.
All right, because we didn't want him to have a room on his own.
Yes.
So he did. He made sure that we booked in. We were double rooms.
Okay. And
So I drew the short straw. I had to sleep in his room.
so you have to sleep with this man that you knew had recently beat another human being to death.
I wasn't worried because we had there was four of us.
Okay.
And we discussed the possibility of him suddenly realizing and trying to abscond. So we had some stupid plan that he would assault me. And then we'd get the police to arrest him.
Okay.
And once that was done, we could get his fingerprints and then send them to Hong Kong, wire them to Hong Kong and get a match, maybe. So these were the kind of contingency plans we had. It was quite a delicate situation, but things turned out okay. And we got on the flight the next day, and we arrived in Hong Kong, Kai Tak Airport at that time. And we pre-arranged for the police to come on board the plane. So before the passengers went off, the police came aboard, and of course I had no handcuffs at the time. As soon as they came aboard, I arrested them for murder.
On the plane?
On the plane, yeah, because he was in our jurisdiction then.
Yeah.
There was no excuse for not arresting him for murder because there was enough circumstantial evidence.
So was he surprised?
He was surprisingly, he looked angry, but he was surprisingly calm. And we put him in handcuffs and led him off. I took him back to police headquarters and took his fingerprints, of course. And Sheila Hamilton, the forensic scientist, came downstairs to take a piece of hair out to get a blood test. We wanted his blood type too because there was some inconsistent material inside the wash basin, which showed a blood type O.
Okay, and you made sure he's wearing the shoes.
Yes.
From on the plane ride.
Yeah, so we seized them.
Okay, so he's bringing the evidence back on his feet.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we have the shoes. We have his fingerprints. Bruce Ferguson, in charge of Fingerprint Bureau, took the fingerprints from him personally. And he said he'd be back as soon as possible. Now, he was the first one back within about half an hour. And Clements refused to say anything. When he was cautioned and being interviewed, just nothing. He was very angry, sat there very angry. Because he'd been fooled into coming back thinking he was a robbery victim.
Yeah.
So Bruce Ferguson put his head through the door with a very long face. And I thought, oh, this is bad news. And he said, no, it's 100% match. So then we put it to Clements that these fingerprints had been found in Jenny's blood in the mirror.
Yeah.
So it was just irrefutable evidence that he was there at the time of the murder.
Okay.
He still refused to say anything, just kept quiet. And a few hours later, the blood came back. Jenny was AB. Right?
Type AB.
Type AB. Now, in Hong Kong at that time, we had no DNA. DNA was in its infancy. But we had a very, very good system, or forensic scientists had a very good system of breaking down blood into sub groupings. To the point they could say that the person with this sub grouping of O or AB or A was 1 in 5 million. Almost as good as DNA. So this was Jenny's blood. So it was sub group to 1 in 5 million people. This was Jenny's blood.
Okay, so now his blood is the fingerprint on the mirror.
No, the Jenny's blood is on the mirror.
Oh, Jenny's
and
blood
his
is
fingerprint
on the mirror.
is in her blood.
Oh, okay. Okay, his fingerprint.
And her blood is on his sweatshirts.
Okay, that's where I was going to ask next.
Yeah.
So that was Jenny's blood.
Yes.
So that's very strong evidence.
It's extremely strong. It is forensic evidence of that nature is stronger than admission evidence or verbal evidence because that can always be challenged as being coerced or made it up or something like that. But this kind of forensic evidence to me is the best.
Okay.
Absolutely the best.
Yeah. So there's just no getting around that Jenny's blood being on his shoes.
No. And while we were in New Zealand, the team back in Hong Kong were busy locating the taxi driver because the taxi actually drove into the dockyard from the Tongshan. You could see the Arcadia, so it drove into the dockyard through the security gate.
Okay.
Of course, the taxi number and time is logged.
Very good.
So while we were in New Zealand, he was located.
Okay.
And he produced a statement saying that, yes, he had picked up the Caucasian of that description.
From that address.
From that address. Initially, he thought he would take him back to North Point. I think after North Point, he eventually found his way to Shok Kee Wan because this Gwailo couldn't explain where the Tongshan was.
Okay.
But,
all right.
So he eventually got to the Tongshan, but it took some time.
Okay.
And when we came back, of course, he picked Clements out an identification for it.
Okay.
And the staff at the Murder Mansions, they also picked them up. This is a man that was seen running with Jenny and running out of the room.
Okay. So I remember the report was he punched a staff member when they tried to make him pay.
Yes.
So this is the staff member now saying this is the guy who did this. Punch me.
Yeah. So getting back to what happened, why this, the scenario is probably as you described or imagined, but he didn't say anything. He didn't make any admissions. He didn't say, well, I want to plead manslaughter because of this, this, and this, or whatever. No. And his parents come out for the trial, very decent people. I felt extremely sorry for them. He was the only son, and to the point that we actually gave them, we would take them in an unmarked police car from the hotel to the court to keep the press away from them. We tried to protect them in a sense, and when the forensic evidence started to be evident in the trial, and the defense really had, there was not much room for them to cross-examine or challenge the forensic evidence. They couldn't, for example, accuse us of planting the blood on the shoes because he took the shoes to New Zealand and he took them back, we did. Or planting his print in Jenny's blood on the mirror. So there was very little maneuver for the defense.
So your forensic evidence is very strong.
Yes.
You have credible witnesses that were there in the timeline.
Yes.
Everything is just matching up.
Yeah, there's some people might ask, but you tricked them into coming back. In America, that might have had the case thrown. That might have had the case thrown out. But in common law, that's not so important. It's the strength of the evidence, not how it was maintained. It's the strength of the evidence that's important, not whether he was tricked into.
I believe in America you can do that.
Yes.
Now,
You can?
You can. Yeah,
Oh, good.
You can lie. Police are allowed to lie to the person in order to secure evidence, secure justice.
Better be careful because some people think police always lie. But anyway, that was quite a straightforward case for the trial.
Okay, I got two. One you just mentioned, the parents. They're in court.
They did say, well,
Did they?
sadly we think he's, yes.
I see. Did John Clement ever talk to his parents?
Yes, but he never
Admitted anything?
No.
Okay. So now there was also one other, sticks in my head, about Jenny drowning in her blood. Her tongue is partially severed. So it's still in one piece. It's just like cut in half or something.
Yes. So it was a profuse bleeding, and she choked on her own blood.
Okay. There was the coroner report said she was bent over.
Yeah.
So, but I'm thinking, so was she bent over on her side, or?
I don't know, because we didn't get.
You weren't there for the first 10 days.
But it's she drowned in her own blood because of the injuries. So it's murder.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you have anything else on this case that you'd like to add?
No, but he's the same age as me now.
Is he still in jail?
No, he was released after 15 years and went back to the UK.
So he's a free man in the UK now?
If he's still alive.
If he's still
alive. At my age, we bless every morning when we wake up.
Out of curiosity, can't help it. When you told him you needed him to come back for the robberies, when you told him to wear his shoes, at any point did he get suspicious something was odd?
If he didn't, then he must have been pretty stupid.
Because I'm wondering, was he a little not so smart?
Well, in my view, he obviously wasn't so smart.
Okay.
But there's very little he could do about it if you think about it. In the captain's cabin, they were discussing about this robbery and whether he'd come back to help us. What could he say no?
Why not?
No.
No, I just lost my watch. It's not.
No, I'm not willing to come back and help with the police in Hong Kong. Yeah. Most people say yes when they get a free flight to Hong Kong and accommodation and flight back to join the ship in Fiji. There's no downside to it. He gets a free holiday from his work, and the captain was quite happy to let him come and then rejoin the ship.
So saying no would have made him look guilty.
Yes, I think so. And the other thing is that we would have got the evidence sooner or later.
Yeah, because you had been in his cabin.
Yes.
So Norman, at the trial, John Clements is convicted of murder.
Yes.
Okay. At any point did he confess to the murder?
No.
Okay. He didn't need to. The forensic evidence was so strong.
Yeah.
What was the sentence? Do you recall?
The only sentence that the judge could hand down at that time was death.
Okay.
Although, because the death sentence was still on the books in the law in Hong Kong. It hadn't been removed.
Okay.
But it was always commuted.
It was commuted.
Always, of course.
Okay, to life imprisonment.
Life imprisonment, the usual standard is about 25 years.
Okay, so, and he served how many years?
I can't say for sure, but I heard that he served 15 years.
And
then back to the UK.
Back
It
to
could
the
be
UK.
that he'd served some of his sentence back in the UK. I'm not sure of these details.
Okay, I see. So could he have time knocked off for good behavior, or is that allowed in Hong Kong?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I guess we'd have to look into that a bit more. Now, I recall you saying that you treated the parents very well.
Well, we did feel sorry. We wanted to kind of shield them from the press.
Okay, so talking about the press, this is a white person killing a Chinese girl. What was the press reaction? How interested are they?
Well, of course, it's very unusual for a Guilo, Caucasian, to be charged with murder, especially murder of a Chinese. They usually fight amongst themselves.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of press interest. There was a lot of conjecture about Jenny's past and whether she owned a bar or this, but it's really not relevant to the case.
Okay.
We treated it the same as any other murder. Doesn't matter if she's a prostitute or some high-class socialite. We didn't care.
Okay, so, but the press was so overwhelming that you did feel a need to protect the parents in a way, put them in a marked car to bring them to court and such.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to make one observation that has come up in other cases about how far will the police go when the victim's Chinese. I think it's remarkable. Hong Kong sent 4 police officers to New Zealand.
Yeah.
They put the resources on the table to catch a white guy who had killed a Chinese person.
We wouldn't treat it any other way.
Okay, because the color didn't matter. It was just a crime.
Of course it doesn't.
Okay. So this is just to confront those numerous allegations we always have on this issue. Like in the Braemar Hills, the Chinese press came out and said it was a Chinese victim with the white folks. So there's nothing to that. And this is a good example of going the extra mile for a Chinese victim.
We would do the same no matter what race the victim is,
Okay.
or what race the suspect is. It makes no difference to us.
Okay.
And for the press to suggest that, I find it quite disgusting.
So,
All the evidence goes against that, so they'd be making it up.
okay. Very good. Well, thanks again, Norman. So I think we'll wrap this case up. And if you like this episode, please subscribe, thumbs up, comment, and share. Thank you very much. Cheers.